Hi, this is Rick for EDU Mobile. Today we're going to talk about the application lifecycle for an application running on an iPhone or an iPad under iOS. So let's get started. First of all, we need to understand the states of a running application. And the first state is not running. This is the state that the application is in, technically, before it has been launched or after it has been terminated by the system. So the app is currently not running at all. It's not in the background, it's not suspended, it's just not running. This state is important because it is a begin or end state for starting an app or ending an app. The second state is inactive. The application has been launched in this state, but it's not responding to events. In fact, the application is being displayed in a sense, but the user cannot interact with the application when it's in the inactive state. Active, of course, the application is running, it's responding to events. And the bulk of our time with applications, the user experience is spent in the running state. Then we have the background state. When we transition from an active state to the background state is the app is running in the background, but it is still executing code. The difference between background and suspended is only the code execution. In the suspended state, the app is still running in the background, but it is not executing code. Normally, apps do not terminate anymore, not since iOS 4.0. Apps don't terminate when they're exited or when the user switches to another app. All of the apps on the device are kept running, usually in a suspended state. They can also run in a background state and execute code in the background, and we'll talk about that much later in the course. So this is all kind of controlled by something called the AppDelegate. The AppDelegate is the delegate class for the actual instance of the running application. This is called UI application main, is the instance of the running application, or UI application. It is a UI application object. So AppDelegate functions as its delegate, and it handles state transitions. And some of the state handling, the state transition handling methods are application will finish launching with options, application did finish launching with options, and so forth. We have state transition methods for entering the foreground and becoming active, resigning active, and entering the background. And then finally, we have an odd one called application will terminate that is most of the time never ever called, and we'll talk about that here in just a moment. So when we start an app, this is what happens. The user taps the app icon, of course. Prior to this, the app has been in inactive state. Then the main function is called. Every C program, an ObjectiveC program, branches out of a main function. So the main function is called at this point. And the main function, in turn, calls a function called UI application main. UI application main does two things. It gives us an instance of the running application, a UI application object, and it also sets that object's delegate to be the app delegate. At this point, the main user interface is then loaded. Then application will finish launching with options is called. This is the first opportunity we have to do things like restoring user interface state and setting up our running application. After application will finish launching with options code is finished running, the UI state is restored. Then application did finish launching with options, it's called, and at this point the application transitions actually after the next method. So let me finish this. Application did finish launching with options, it's called, and then application will enter foreground is called. After application will enter foreground code is done, the application state is changing from inactive to active. So application did become active is finally called when the application is active and responsive to user interface events. So what happens when we enter the background? Well, that's a much simpler process. the user taps the home key, or let's say switches to another application or something like that, two things happen. The first is the application transitions to a background state, but it doesn't do this. It doesn't make the transition until after application will resign active is called. So we're in the active state. The user taps the home key, or another application is run, or something like that. Application will resign active is called as a notification to us that the application is about to go from active to background. And then application did enter background is called. There is no delegate method. At this point, we're in the background state. There is no delegate method to tell us when we went from the background state to the suspended state. If code is executing in the background, as for multitasking operations, the background state may be in for a little while, but not very long. We don't have very long before the application goes from background, where it's executing code, to suspended, where it is not. Okay, so let's talk about this crazy app termination thing. Application will terminate normally is never called now. Since iOS version 4, apps don't terminate when the user switches applications or taps the home key. Before that, they did. An application will terminate was very useful to tell us when an application was about to end. But now it's really not that useful, except in 4 cases. The first is that the app was obviously linked under an iOS version earlier than 4.0. The second is that the app is running on a device using iOS version earlier than 4.0, and this should be a very limited case. Apple users are typically early adopters of new systems. The third is that the device does not support multitasking, which is also fairly rare now. But the fourth, we can define a key in the info.plist file for the application, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the course. But the info.plist file contains application level settings. We can define a key called UI application exits on suspend. And if we define this key, then when the app enters the suspended state, application will terminate will be called. However, application will terminate is never called when an app is in a suspended state. iOS can terminate an application if it needs memory and it's in a suspended state. It'll just kill the app. But application will terminate is never called in that case. If an app is suspended and the user goes into the multitasking interface and kills the application, application will not terminate, will terminate is not called in that case either. So app termination and trapping the case where app terminates or the application will terminate is rather more difficult now than it was before 4.0 for the simple reason that in a multitasking environment, normally our applications are always running in the background. Whether or not they're executing code, whether they're in the background state or in the suspended state, they're still running. Unless, of course, the system needs the memory, in which case they'll be killed. So I hope that clears up the application will terminate method. When, and most importantly, that it probably will not be called in current modern iOS code. Thank you very much.